surface in the West war against Russia than it has been ever. Can you describe where you think we are and where this is going?
Yeah, let me do it through the tool, Tucker, of the article I wrote on the coming war with Russia. And the reason I wrote it was I was hearing a lot of people here saying we're getting ready for war with Russia. We'll be ready to fight in 2030. I don't think that's true because we can't afford to be. But anyway, that's the narrative that's being sold to the European publics. And the problem is that, of course, the Russians will be listening to this. Of course, they'll be listening to it. So I thought it would be a good idea to say, well, okay, well, if we're going to be ready to fight a war with Russia, what's it going to be like? And the first thing about the article was I said that let's not assume that Russia is going to wait doing nothing until 2030 until we're ready. So let's assume that because of the way that we're starting to promote attacks deep into Russia by the E3, that's Germany, Britain, and France, providing weapons with significant warheads as well, 250 kilograms and significant range deep into Russia. Let's not assume that the Russians are just going to sit back and let this happen. So my starting point was to say, okay, well, let's assume that Russia attacks Europe or attacks certain elements of Europe. And what the Russians have said is they have not taken these attacks off the agenda, which is a warning. And it's a warning which we seem to be ignoring. So let's assume that the first attacks happen in September of this year. And my scenario, and I should emphasize, it's a scenario, not a forecast. So it's trying to make people think about what could happen. So let's assume these attacks happen in September of this year and the Russians destroy with hypersonic missiles the factories that are making drones and missiles in Britain, in France, and in Germany. And the question then is, what does Europe do? And of course, the first thing Europe does is it says, okay, well, we're now going to invoke Article 5. And all of a sudden, people realize what Article 5 really means. I mean, you've got NATO, which, when I was serving in NATO, in the Standing NATO Force Mediterranean, we used to say that NATO stood for no ability to organize. It's slightly unfair. But actually, NATO isn't this great omnipotent coalition. People say it's the strongest coalition since in history. I mean, that obviously isn't true. The strongest coalition in history, as far as I can see, was the Allied coalition in the Second War with the United States, Britain, the Commonwealth, Russia, and China. That's the strongest coalition by far. So NATO invokes Article 5, and the three countries that have been attacked invoke Article 5, and they realize suddenly that actually what Article 5 means is that an attack on one is an attack on all, but it doesn't mean that actually the whole of the NATO forces have to respond, and people decide to respond as they think best. And in the article, I propose that Hungary says, no, we're not getting engaged. Spain says, no, we're not getting engaged. We don't think this is in our interests. I think other countries might equivocate. It's difficult to say, but, countries like Hungary, for example, obviously won't. So at that stage, we suddenly see that this isn't all it means. But the big issue, Tucker, is what does the United States do? Now, of course, we know that Rubio has been looking as if the United States is shifting back in to support these operations. But at that moment, I think there's an open question about what United States do if it sees attacks into Russia, especially if those have been warned, that the attacks are warned and we've made no response to them. And my guess is that the Americans will not want to commit troops into mainland Europe to fight a war against Russia on European soil and for US troops to fight and die on the European soils. I wouldn't if I were in the United States. So you're then in the situation, well, now what do the Europeans do? And again, just to develop the scenario, I assume that the Europeans do the only thing they can do, because their land forces are not ready, is that they use air forces to respond to Russia, and that doesn't go very well. That actually they find that they're up against Russia, which has got a lot of experience in air defense. In one of my jobs in the Navy was to be the captain of air defense destroyer. And I was what was known as the anti-air warfare commander. And I can tell you that we are in poor shape in Europe in terms of being able to defend our skies. We would struggle to respond to saturation drone attacks. We've got extremely limited responses to conventional ballistic missiles. I'm a great fan of Ted Postal, who is an MIT professor on this. He thinks that the Patriot PAC-3 systems are possibly looking about 3% effectiveness. And when it comes to hypersonic missiles, we've got no response whatsoever. So suddenly we're making attacks that aren't very successful. But in return, I say that because the E3 have decided to respond to Russia's attacks, that they then take the gloves off and use hypersonic missiles, probably with conventional missiles, to do more damage. And the thing that I would go after, especially as an energy expert, would be to do the same thing that they've done in Kiev and in Ukraine, which is to surgically start to undermine our energy infrastructure. And I can tell you that a resonant missile landing in a liquid natural gas terminal or an oil terminal in Milford Haven or Rotterdam would do extensive damage. That would be bad enough, but unfortunately, of course, because of the sanctions we placed on Russia in the first place about 4 years ago, we've switched ourselves off from Russian oil, switched ourselves off from Russian gas, so that's 40% of our gas. We've also, of the particular products, we've switched ourselves off to Russian diesel, who used to provide us with 40% of Europe's diesel. Now, as an energy expert, if you can explain to me how you can run a modern industrial society without diesel, then I'm all ears, but I don't know how to do it. Diesel is critical for farming, for fishing, for food logistics, for construction, for running the other two primary energy sources, that's renewable energy and nuclear energy. I could go on and on. It really is the critical fuel, and we've switched ourselves off to it. And of course, having switched ourselves off and increased our prices in Europe, which of course is having an effect on our economies, especially Germany's economy, we're now in the situation where the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And so we've got a second wham on top of the first wham. So talk about being in a very, very fragile position. It's an extremely weak position, not least of all because we import about 12 million barrels a day into oil into the European region. Norway is reasonably self-sufficient. In fact, Norway is completely self-sufficient, and we get about 45% or so of our hydrocarbons from the North Sea, although that's reducing. But Europe generally is extremely vulnerable. So what you've got is a situation which is that our energy infrastructure is being written down at a time when we have no chance of defending our skies against it. And again, this is why I was trying to actually make the point to people who are prepared to think about this, what this war might look like, because the economic consequences of this would be profound. Mathematically, there's a really close relationship between the use of energy and GDP. It's extremely close. It's close to 1. It's about sort of 0.99 or something.
Yes.
So what that means is when you take energy out of the system, then you are going to have a consequent effect, which is similar in rough order of magnitude on your economy. So if we take 10% of the world's energy away, then surprise, surprise, don't be surprised if we get a global reduction in GDP of 10%. And that's getting close to a depression. Indeed, it's on the borderline of depression. But going back to Europe, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we were in a situation where, were such an attack to happen, then we would be in deep economic trouble. And I think that would lead to deep political trouble as well. But again, it is a scenario, and the point of the scenario was to help people really think about what such a war might mean. And really make sure that we've done the risk assessment.
Lots of reasons to be strongly in favor of Mars men. Low testosterone is bad. Obviously, it affects healthy testosterone levels, energy